People have ideological differences, political differences, that's okay. But on issues of basic human rights and international law, there should be unity. Military trade, economic trade, academic relations, research, cultural, sports, Eurovision, all of this gives Israel the impunity that it feels right now to continue a live stream genocide. Liberation doesn't fall from the sky. It's human agency. It's collective power. South African apartheid fell when there was sufficient people power across the world to force it to fall. We're getting there. I've called it since 2009 our South Africa moment. BDS was born in 2005. It is led by the largest Palestinian civil society coalition. It is inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle. It calls for ending Israel's occupation, its system of apartheid, and its denial of Palestinian refugees' rights, especially the right of return. To achieve that, BDS calls for ending the complicity of states, corporations, and institutions in Israel's regime of oppression. Without ending that complicity, Palestinians alone cannot achieve liberation. So we need everyone to end complicity in their sphere of relative influence. International law recognizes the right of people under foreign occupation, under colonial rule, to resist colonial rule by all means, so long as they target the combatants, not the non-combatants. BDS itself in Palestine is a form of resistance, non-violent resistance, but it defends the right to all forms of resistance within international law. So we do not advocate for armed resistance, but we defend the right. So it's a right under international law, but we have to adhere to international law. South Africa, unlike other settler colonies, the colonists did not want to exterminate the indigenous. They wanted to take their land, take their wealth, and use them as cheap labor. Israel fits the traditional settler colonial mode, which is extermination of the indigenous. South Africa was a very rich country. Israel as a state that has overtaken Palestine is not per se a rich country, but it has a lot of trade, weapons, security, surveillance, spyware, and technology that evolved from those areas, which means that Israel is very vulnerable to economic boycotts, to academic and cultural boycotts, because it's extremely dependent on the West. This is the world's first live stream genocide. If people around the world who have some conscience cannot unite to stop the genocide and to save international law, what are they going to unite on?
Hi to everybody. We are in Naples. Today is 20 September 2025. We have Mr. Omar Barghouti here. There was a meeting with some activists that are building a BDS group here in Naples, Italy. Mr. Barghouti, thank you very much for your time. We know you're very tired. We've been talking for 2 hours. You are the founder of the co-founder of the BDS movement, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. Could you explain to people who doesn't know what BDS actually is, what it is?
BDS was born in 2005. It is led by the largest Palestinian civil society coalition. It is inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle and the US civil rights movement, but it's rooted in a century of Palestinian popular resistance. It calls for ending Israel's occupation, its system of apartheid, and its denial of Palestinian refugees' rights, especially the right of return. To achieve that, BDS calls for ending the complicity of states, corporations, and institutions in Israel's regime of oppression. Without ending that complicity, Palestinians alone cannot achieve liberation. So we need everyone to end complicity in their sphere of relative influence.
Well, you talked about the tradition of resistance in Palestine before the struggle against the apartheid in South Africa. Of course, there are links between these two struggles, but there are also differences. I think one of the biggest challenges is that the regime in South Africa didn't have all this power, political, economic power, all the lobbies. So how can we face this kind of different challenge?
Indeed, South Africa and Israel share an apartheid system, share a history of settler colonialism. But as you said, there are many differences as well. The main difference is that South Africa, unlike other settler colonies, the colonists did not want to exterminate the indigenous. They wanted to take their land, take their wealth, and use them as cheap labor. Concentrate them in Bantustans and smaller areas and take their land and use them as cheap labor. Israel fits the traditional settler colonial mode, which is extermination of the indigenous. They couldn't do it for 77 years for various political, geopolitical conditions. Now when they had the opportunity, they have the White House and Congress are completely aligned with Israel. Israel's influence in the White House has never been this pervasive. So they felt this is the opportunity. Fascist forces are growing in Europe, so they went for extermination, which they always wanted to do. They want to get rid of the indigenous Palestinians. So that's the key difference. There's also, of course, South Africa was a very rich country. Israel as a state that has overtaken Palestine is not per se a rich country, but it has a lot of trade, and most of what it trades in are weapons, security, surveillance, spyware, and technology that evolved from those areas, which means that Israel is very vulnerable to economic boycotts, to academic and cultural boycotts, because it's extremely dependent on the West.
Well, we stay in the field of activism. I strongly believe neo-fascists, all the MAGA movement in US, but also the neo-fascists we have at the government in Italy, it's very easy for them to unite. While for the left, and when I say left, I mean it in a very broad sense, as well as for the more liberal forces who are struggling for human rights, because the struggle for Palestine, at the end of the day, I would say it's a very basic human struggle for human rights. So all these forces, more liberal or leftist, they really struggle to get together, don't they?
Indeed, the far right unites much more than the rest. And I agree with you that people have ideological differences, political differences, that's okay. But on issues of basic human rights and international law, there should be unity. What Israel is doing is a genocide enabled by Western colonial powers, the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and others. And Italy is complicit as well. Military trade, economic trade, academic relations, research, cultural, sports, Eurovision, all of this gives Israel the impunity that it feels right now to continue a live stream genocide, which is important. This is the world's first live stream genocide. If people around the world who have some conscience cannot unite to stop the genocide and to save international law, what are they going to unite on in the future?
Yes, I understand we have to multiply our efforts, and also I say it as a libertarian socialist. We have to specify in English because in Italian I would say just libertarian, but English it's always good. As a leftist person, we have maybe it's the moment to overcome some difference and unite on some very basic issues like this. Another question I want to ask you.
Last one.
Huh?
Last one.
Okay. Most of people says that protesting is useless because the most of the powerful people they decide everything in the end. And once I heard you in another interview telling a story. You were a young student. You were protesting against the regime of apartheid in South Africa. And somebody asked you, why are you protesting? You're never gonna see the end of the apartheid in your lifetime. So my question is both rhetorical and factual. Will we see the end of apartheid and occupation in Palestine?
We might be good activists, good human rights defenders, but we're not good prophets. We cannot predict. And liberation doesn't fall from the sky. It's human agency. It's collective power. South African apartheid fell when there was sufficient people power across the world to force it to fall. We're getting there. I've called it since 2009 our South Africa moment. I think we're very near our South Africa moment. But when will we reach liberation? It's extremely difficult to predict. To make it faster, we need everyone in Europe, in Italy, to end their complicity, the state, corporate, institutional complicity in apartheid. That will definitely make it end much faster. BDS was established in 2005 by the absolute majority in Palestinian civil society. It calls for ending the occupation, ending apartheid, and for the right of refugees to return and receive reparations. The most important aspect about BDS after Palestinian rights is ending complicity of states, corporations, and institutions. So BDS is not about feeling good or about raising a slogan. It's about working to end the complicity of your state, your corporations, your institutions. And therefore, or you translate or shall I? Okay. So what Palestinians are calling for is not charity. Many in Italy, across Europe, think Palestinians are being destroyed in Gaza. There's a genocide and there's apartheid and settler colonialism against all Palestinians. So I want to donate money for a clinic, for a school. It's nice and very noble, but that's not the main issue that we need right now to stop the genocide. We need Italy to be less complicit in genocide. This is the key point. So Palestinians are not calling for charity. We're calling for meaningful solidarity. But before both, we're demanding an end to complicity, to do no harm. That's the most profound ethical obligation when you live in a state that is so complicit, a quasi-democratic state like yours. Not like Saudi Arabia, where you can't open your mouth. Here you can, until now. Use it while it lasts. So if you have the freedom to influence politics, to influence corporations, to influence city councils, trade unions, and so on, you have an ethical obligation to end their complicity in Israel's occupation, settler colonialism, apartheid, and definitely genocide. So the same principles apply for the academic boycott, the cultural boycott, the sports boycott, economic boycott, the same principle. And this is why I gave this introduction to get to the academic boycott issue. Universities in Italy are complicit in Israel's crimes against Palestinians through their intimate relationships with Israeli universities, all of which are deeply involved in designing, implementing, justifying, and whitewashing all of Israel's crimes. So no one can claim, oh, we did not know. We're just doing this nice project, sociology or philosophy or whatever the case may be. The institutions in Israel, the academic institutions, are deeply complicit. So you must cut the ties. When Italian universities or some even academics say, we produce knowledge, science, we don't do politics, we're neutral, it's extremely important to tell them there is no neutrality when you're complicit. Neutrality and complicity don't work together. It's not a right-wing vis-a-vis left-wing position. If you're a Marxist or a conservative or a Christian Democrat or whatever you are, don't be a criminal. Stop your involvement in crime. It's a basic human decency issue. It's not a left or right issue. But what about academic freedom? That was one of the questions. Some academics who want to continue the complicity use the slogan, oh, we don't want to violate academic freedom. Academic freedom, first of all, does not mean complicity in crimes. There is no academic freedom to be complicit in crimes. Do you have the academic freedom in Italy to support racism against Jews, let's say? You absolutely don't. It's illegal even in most European countries. There is no academic freedom, there's a limit. When you incite to racial violence, when you say Arab people are half-brains and we should kill them all, you have no academic freedom to do that. Or when you say women are, all the kind of racist, discriminatory issues, you don't have the academic freedom to say that because it leads to violence against those communities. Similarly, when it comes to war crimes, much, much worse, not just discrimination, not just racist speech, war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, that's where academic freedom has to stop. You have no right to continue a relationship of complicity and claim academic freedom. If we spoke about this 2 years ago, I would have told you we don't have any, except one university in South Africa. But today, we have tens of universities in the Spanish state, in Belgium, in Norway, even the Netherlands. So if the Netherlands can do it, you can do it in Italy. The BDS movement calls for institutional boycotts, which targets institutions because of their complicity. It doesn't call for boycotting individual Israeli academics based on their identity. BDS targets complicity, not identity. It targets institutions, not individuals. Unless the individuals are war criminals, that's something different. In the South African case, we boycotted everyone and everything South African. It was a blanket boycott against everything. And many Italian academics who participated then in boycotting South African universities and academics are today saying, oh, we can't boycott Israel because of academic freedom. The Palestinian boycott is much less than the South African boycott. How could you? This hypocrisy, but hypocrisy is part of Europe, so. International law recognizes the right of people under foreign occupation, under colonial rule, to resist colonial rule by all means, so long as they target the combatants, not the non-combatants. This is the key about international law. So the BDS movement, because it's anchored in international law, and it's a non-violent movement, obviously, defends the right to resistance by all means. BDS itself in Palestine is a form of resistance, non-violent resistance. But it defends the right to all forms of resistance within international law. So not violating international law, it's very important. So we do not advocate for armed resistance, but we defend the right. We don't advocate for obvious reasons. We're not a violent movement. We don't advocate for anything that is not within our mandate. So it's a right under international law, but we have to adhere to international law. So yesterday, I had an interview with BBC, and they asked exactly the same question. So what do you think about this Palestinian resistance group or that, and what they did October 7th? So I said, well, first, when you begin a colonial system, when you begin occupation, you begin violence. Any violence after that is a reaction to the initial violence. Occupation is violence. Settler colonialism is violence. Apartheid is violence. It is the root cause of violence. So we, in the BDS movement, would like to end all violence. The violence of the oppressor and the reactive violence of the oppressed. And therefore, we want to end oppression. That's the only way to end violence. So just to finish this part, we should not fall into that trap. Because what does this question aim to achieve? Not to talk about Gaza, not to talk about the genocide. Shift the discussion into what the Palestinians did. Is it right or wrong? If you become defensive, you've fallen into the trap. So when I answered the BBC, I said, 720 some days of genocide, and you only care about one day, October 7th? Are you reading talking points from the Israeli embassy in London? And he was very defensive. No, I did not receive any talking points from the Israeli embassy. So never take a journalist's question as the Bible. It's a suggestion. You don't have to answer exactly, especially in Italy and a few other countries where your so-called mainstream media is not media, it's trash. The last advice is when the journalist says Palestinians are practicing terrorism, what do you say? And you say, no, Palestinians are not terrorists. You already fell into the trap. You put Palestinians and terrorists in the same sentence. Never use their language. In fact, we used this against Israel when we launched Israeli Apartheid Week. We kept talking about Israeli apartheid, until Israel said, no, Israel is not an apartheid state. Thank you very much. Job done. Puritanism is a problem on the left, where people raise slogans to be pure. Anything that is not pure is bad and wrong. What's wrong with that kind of mentality? You put everyone in the same basket, from the evil to the really good but has problems. All of them, you put them in the same basket. That is not a way to do politics. That's a way to do sloganeering. You sit on your couch, feel good about yourself. So not every group that sounds radical is good. Some of them have a big question mark on them. Some of them are just idiots. But some have a big question mark, security-wise, their connections. So when I won't mention names, I won't mention any specific locations, but in one university in Europe, there was a very big campaign to boycott Israeli universities, supported by the absolute majority of students, many academics. And then suddenly, some students come and say, this is all liberal nonsense. Forget boycotting and so on. You are appealing to the university, and the university is a tool of imperialism. We have to destroy the university, not appeal to it to cut ties with Israel. Sloganeering doesn't get any more suspicious than that. This is not an idiot who's doing this. This is someone with an agenda. It's not our agenda, it's the other side's. So you have all the banks in Italy funding all sorts of criminal activities, Leonardo and the oil companies and Eni and so on. And you have one ethical bank that is trying to do something better. Is it pure? No. In a capitalist society, no bank can be pure. It won't be pure. Unless you have... When the socialist revolution succeeds, maybe you'll have an ethical, totally ethical bank. But everything is relative. If you say, oh, they're not pure, I don't want to deal with them, you're putting them along with the evil banks that are funding crimes. This is just not strategic. This is not smart. So an ethical bank wants to do right. We should take them on a journey, how to be more ethical. We should continue pressuring them to be more ethical. If we can pressure them to get rid of the HP computers and replace them, if there is a replacement, then great. If there is no replacement, let's say, in some hypothetical situation, only this company makes this system that the Italian authorities accept, let's say, hypothetically, then they don't have an obligation to boycott that company because they have no choice. Which is the final point I want to say. There's an ethical principle in the BDS movement that is all important and applies everywhere. There's a difference between voluntary complicity and involuntary complicity, which means Palestinians in the occupied territory buy Israeli salt because there is no other salt. Either you don't use salt in your food, which is bad for your health, or you use Israeli salt. So when some Europeans in solidarity come to the occupied territory and they say, Palestinians are not boycotting, you're asking us in Rome and Paris and Berlin to boycott, but Palestinians are not boycotting, they're using Israeli products. I know Europeans can sometimes be slow, but the last time we checked, Berlin and Rome and Paris were not under occupation. We are. So sometimes we don't have a choice. When you don't have a choice, you don't have a moral obligation to boycott because you don't have a choice. If there's a medicine that only Teva makes and you have no other medicine and you have to take it, you cannot boycott it because your life, your health is more important. You cannot boycott it. You have an ethical obligation to boycott when you have a choice. Remember that. And many politicians lie. Fascist politicians are compulsive liars. So when they say, oh, we have no military trade with Israel, yes, they do. They do direct trade with Israel, plus the maritime transfer. A lot of the military transfer to Israel passes through Italy and Greece and other countries, Spain and France and so on. So the maritime boycott to prevent your ports, your dock workers, your unions from being complicit in Israel's crimes, you have to stop the military transfer through Italian ports. So in the military embargo and the maritime transfer in particular, trade unions are essential. So we really want this kind of action to go to the wider European space so that many trade unions across Europe can do the same actions and prevent all illegal shipment of arms to Israel, because international law says it is absolutely illegal to transfer weapons to a state even accused of committing genocide, even accused. Today the UN Independent Commission recognizes it's genocide. It's no longer accused. The Italian state is responsible to international law, above Italian law, above European law. It is responsible to international law first and foremost. So it is violating its obligations to international law. And by doing that, Italy is helping to destroy the international legal system. With Israel and the US, they're destroying international law. We're going back to pre-1945. So your government is part of that process. The BDS movement never suggests alternatives to complicit companies because we're an intersectional movement, which means a company can be better than others on Palestinian issues. So let's say we recommend, don't buy from X, buy from Y, because it's better for Palestinians. But Y could be involved in violations of human rights against indigenous communities in Ecuador, or against black people across the African continent, or against women, or against, and so on. So we never suggest alternatives. But if this network of small businesses is created to try to create an ethical alternative, they can recommend a more ethical, again, more ethical, less ethical. I don't use ethical, unethical, because everything is between black and white in life. Remember, there's no purity. So if you recommend, don't go with booking and so on, now we have a more ethical application that is used in France and Italy and Spain and Japan and Thailand and Nepal and Sri Lanka. We have BDS campaigns in all those countries, and all of them are interested. You're not the only one having this discussion. So it's important to connect to every BDS chapter around the world who's discussing the exact same thing. And if this network, that is not a BDS network of small hospitality businesses, you can really create a lot of global power. Don't underestimate how those big American companies will look at you when you're connected to 6, 7 big tourist destinations. They take you much more seriously. So yes, BDS can help with this connecting of groups. And if this network decides to call for a strike, one-day strike against booking, Boycott is what we do. We 100% support that. We would love to promote it, of course. So the campaign against Teva, as I said, is growing around the world. I think Italy had the first campaign against Teva, and at that time, we were approached by Italian activists as BDS in Palestine, and they said, do you support this campaign? So we consulted with trade unions in Italy, and trade unions said, at that time, Teva was the only generic medicine available for working people. So the working class buys Teva then. It was the only one. So if you boycott Teva, they have to buy those fancy Swiss and British and American medicines that are more expensive. So we decided we can't. Ethically, we cannot call in Italy for a boycott unless there's an alternative. Now, there are so many alternatives. Thank goodness. So, yes, we fully support a boycott of Teva. On the other question, we have not seen research yet. We would welcome any researchers looking into other Israeli biomedical, technical companies that are involved in this business. Most likely they'll be complicit in some military security application as well. Hardly any technology in Israel is not connected to the military. It is 99% connected to the military or comes from the military. So it's important to look into that. Currently, I have not seen any research, but if there is research, we would welcome it. There are 3 levels to the Teva boycott. Physicians, doctors, that's probably the most important, because if they don't prescribe it, no one will buy it. So, but doctors are the most conservative part, the most difficult part. So, but let's keep that in mind. We need to have doctors support this campaign. So if there's a medical association, medical union of doctors, we need to work with them to adopt not anti-Teva boycott, they won't. Let's push for what we call an ethical procurement policy, ethical contracting policy. So the ethical procurement policy works for the union of doctors. I don't know what they call it in Italy. Is there a syndicate for doctors? Is there a syndicate? Yeah. Okay, so the union can adopt this, and the pharmacies can adopt this, and health centers can adopt this. So institutional, it's not individual. Basically, an ethical procurement policy says that this institution, pharmacy, union, whatever the case may be, will not contract any company that is knowingly, persistently implicated, involved, complicit in serious human rights violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. And it has to be serious, because if you just say any company involved in human rights violations, that's all of them, except Ben and Jerry's. So you have to raise the ceiling, otherwise you boycott everyone. So what is the union of doctors, what will they say? They can't say no to such a policy. Because if they say no, it means that they insist on being unethical. No matter how conservative they are, it's very difficult to resist this ethical procurement policy. We've written it in a way that is really irresistible, except by fascists. So this is the doctors level, the pharmacies level. The third level, which you mentioned, is the most important in terms of where we can have actual support, grassroots, people. It's the least impactful, because doctors and pharmacists have much more power, but it's the easiest to convince. It's easier to convince many people when you go to the pharmacy. They've done that in France, and I think in Italy. They have on their medical insurance card a sticker, I don't accept Teva medicine. So the pharmacist looks at this and says, apparently it's your right. You have a right to reject a certain brand if there is an alternative, of course. If there's no alternative, you have no choice. But consumers, quote unquote, can do this. And that's very effective.
Buonasera a tutti e a tutti, io sono Paolo, sono un giornalista indipendente e un media attivista, quindi farò un breve pensiero sui media e una domanda sui media. Il breve pensiero è che abbiamo parlato di abbandonare gradualmente grandi piattaforme come Airbnb ecco, dobbiamo impegnarci anche in un progetto di lungo termine, di abbandonare anche piattaforme come Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Google, TikTok, eccetera. Mi risulta appunto che per quanto riguarda Google il BDS fa una campagna di pressione perché non potremmo buttare i cellulari Android e cose del genere. Quindi un'alternativa a queste cose, ai social sociali, ai social antisociali, c'è, si chiama Fediverso. Non vado troppo nei dettagli, segnatevi questa parola se non lo conoscete, Fediverso in English, e insomma fate un po' di ricerche, poi magari mi trattengo, se non ne sapete proprio nulla, magari ne possiamo fare. La domanda riguarda sempre i media e la questione del purismo o puritanismo. C'è un noto documentario, No Other Land, e c'è stata anche, diciamo, un dibattito, una polemica tra il PSPY, il ramo accademico del PDS, e No Other Land. Ho letto attentamente, diciamo, quello che ha detto il PACB. Onestamente l'ho trovato un po' vago, eccetto per una cosa, il PAC mi dice che il team di No Other Land avrebbe collaborato con un'azienda che si chiama Greenhouse. Ora, con un genocidio in corso non penso che questa sia una priorità. Però, insomma, soprattutto tra attivisti magari potrebbe essere utile confrontarsi su questi temi e capire anche, insomma, perché il PACP ha accusato No Other Land di essere conniventi con Israele e perché No Other Land ha accusato sostanzialmente il PACP di essere purista.
Yes, thank you for this. It's a very difficult thing because normalization is the most difficult part of BDS to explain to white people. No offense. Everywhere else in the world, it's very easy. It takes us 5 minutes, they get it. In Europe, I have to contextualize it. It's not easy to explain. Normalization, because the term in Italian and French and English and whatever European language may not mean something negative. When states end the state of war, they normalize relations. That's something good. They have peace and relations, that's good. In the Arab context, especially the Palestinian, but in the Arab context in general, normalization means making something that is inherently abnormal appear deceptively normal. Like the simplest example is a master-slave relationship. A master-slave relationship is inherently unethical. It's inherently oppressive. It's inherently abnormal. If a master and a slave are dancing, it's not love, it's rape. So, there are two conditions for a relationship between Israelis and Arabs, including Palestinians, to be ethical, to be not normalizing. There are two conditions. First, the Israelis must accept Palestinian rights under international law. We're not asking for the moon. It's basic. An Israeli who cannot accept full Palestinian rights under international law doesn't think we are human enough. We don't deserve equal rights like all humans. I'm not interested in a relationship with that. And this is only relations between Arabs and Israelis, not internationals. This is a very Arab issue because Palestine is mainly an Arab issue. The second condition is that the relationship itself has to be a relationship of what we call co-resistance. Co-resistance, resisting together. Which means if an Israeli does recognize Palestinian rights, all of them under international law, especially the right of Palestinian refugees to return. That's the most important. Assume that they do. But they want to do a typical Italian project, women making bread for peace. such bullshit projects. I have no idea where the Italians come up with these ideas. But anyway, and they fund it, and the Europeans in general, but Italians are crazy about normalization. I don't understand why. But anyway, it's what's wrong with that project? Palestinian women and Israeli women making bread for peace. What's wrong with peace? Everyone wants peace. Yes, you want peace. We want peace with justice. It doesn't make any sense without justice. So, what's wrong with no other land? I had to give this introduction. I said this is a difficult concept to explain, so I have to give this introduction. No other land, why in the midst of genocide would we even issue a statement on a film that's against occupation by Israelis and Palestinians, and it's opposed to the occupation. It's about an occupied Palestinian village. Because this film became a model for quite a few people in the Arab region to reach stardom, to reach fame. You need an Israeli with you. You need to be validated by an Israeli. Your voice is not sufficient. This is giving a very terrible model to Arab filmmakers, including Palestinians, that if you want to reach the Oscars and you want to reach European festivals and Venice Biennale and so on and so forth, you need an Israeli with you because you're not good enough. This racist notion, this very colonial notion, is very serious to us, even in the middle of genocide, because it helps entrench the dehumanization of Palestinians, which is part of the genocide. The last point about this is part of the Israeli directors do not recognize the three rights. They oppose the occupation, but they don't mention Palestinian refugees' rights. Palestinian refugees are 68% of the Palestinian people, outside and inside Palestine. 68%. So anyone who doesn't recognize our UN stipulated right of refugees to return and receive reparations does not consider us equal humans. They want to end one aspect of the oppression, the occupation, but not everything else. Is this Puritanism? I'll answer after the translation. So this is by definition not Puritanism. Puritanism is insisting on something impossible to achieve. And therefore you end up doing nothing in reality because you want purity and purity does not exist. So you don't do politics. You don't build power. And BDS is about building power, people power to achieve change. Insisting on our minimal rights under international law is the absolute fundamental minimum without which we cannot exist. So it is not Puritan to insist on our basic rights. Anyone who cannot recognize our basic rights under international law is a racist. At the University of Amsterdam, very conservative, the staff succeeded with the trade union representing the staff, academics and workers, to do a 4-day strike calling for academic boycott of Israel. It was the first trade union strike in history calling for the academic boycott of Israel. It's based on that only. Now you would expect that the university would fire them because this is not based on contracts. But they didn't because the union found the right arguments, how it is based on contract, the mental health of the staff working in an institution that is complicit in genocide. They did the right thing and they set a precedent in history. Again, if they do it in the Netherlands, definitely you can do it in Italy.